Do games promote unrealistic male stereotypes? Totally. Wow. Okay, so we had some real back and forth during last week's episode about Anita Sarkeesian's feminism and the future of games. More than 3,500 comments. That's amazing. But that got us thinking, if video games' treatment of women and female characters is problematic, then the ones depicting men should be okay. Right? I mean, 89% of game designers and 97% of game programmers are men. Maleness is not exactly foreign territory. But if we take a closer look, things aren't always so hot for us fellas. For a couple reasons. Let's start with the physique. Obviously, female bodies are ridiculous, but male ones are too. Let's do a brief survey. Kratos? Check. Duke Nukem? Check. Chris Redfield? Check. Coltrane, Dom, and Marcus? Check plus. Just like Barbie has physically impossible female proportions, if these guys were real people, they'd look like this. Now maybe you don't think it's such a big deal to show muscle-bound guys in game after game, but in aggregate, it's not without an effect. Men are starting to suffer the same body image problems that have plagued women for decades. An estimated 10 to 15% of the people who suffer from anorexia or bulimia are men, and sadly, that number of men is on the rise. There's an even more male-specific disorder called muscle dysmorphia, or bigorexia. It's overexercising and steroid abuse in an unhealthy pursuit of some imaginary, perfect, muscular body. And unfortunately, it's also on the rise. And with games, as much as their outside physique is overdeveloped, their inside emotional world is underdeveloped. Macho men in video games have a tiny emotional range and seem to be largely invulnerable to feelings like fear, trauma, or the crushing guilt of killing thousands of people. And when it comes to emotional expression, games tend to pull from the John Wayne handbook. Master Chief, Isaac Clarke, and Gordon Freeman are all short with words. Hell, Doomguy doesn't even have a name. Now to be fair, certain games have gotten better about giving their protagonists reasons for their actions, which makes them feel less like atrocity-committing robots. Joel, from The Last of Us, has one of the most poignantly fleshed out backgrounds in all of gaming, but that hardly justifies what a murderous psychopath he becomes as the game progresses. And like Joel, men are expected to lead, even when they've suffered. Booker DeWitt may be scarred from the Civil War, but a little PTSD doesn't stop him from saving Elizabeth. Even two of my favorite games, Ico and Enslaved, find their tortured protagonists in positions of strength, not weakness. Men are always expected to be the hero, no matter what. But there's something much deeper that's actually more problematic. In fact, it's so glaringly obvious that you probably don't even notice it. Let's stop talking about the main character for a moment and take a look around at our virtual world. In games that feature people, who gets killed? It's men. It's almost always men. And who gets placed in the line of fire? Men also. If we flipped the genders and had a game where you killed woman after woman after woman with nary a man in sight, people would probably get a little upset. And with good reason. But maybe you're saying, what's so bad about killing other men? Who cares if we're acclimated to seeing thousands of men die over and over again in games? Who cares if the vast majority of men are expected to be disposable? Well, maybe now's a good time to stop and think about what that disposability actually means. In The Myth of Male Power, former National Organization of Women board member Warren Farrell says that men have been systematically trained to sacrifice their health, their bodies, and ultimately their lives, without question, for the good and protection of women and children. And historically speaking, there's good reason for this. If you had a tribe of 200 people, split 50-50 between men and women, and you lost 75% of the men to fighting with neighboring tribes, then you could still repopulate your society. But if you lost 75% of the women, then you're gonna have a really tough time getting your society back on track. So from a purely biological perspective, it's easy to understand why women are more important to protect than men who, well, as a group are just expendable. And this idea of the expendable male has been going on for so long that we don't even bat an eye when we spend hours mowing down dudes in games. Now, I don't believe Farrell's conclusion that patriarchal societies benefit women at the expense of men, but that observation about male disposability certainly rings true for the current state of games. I want to be clear. This isn't a pissing contest about who has it worse, men or women, and it's certainly not a sermon against violent games. You can see my thoughts about violent video games here. But think about it this way. As with women, we should think about the impact that men in games has on men in the real world. It could be unreasonable body expectations, or an inability to express emotion, or the pressure to man up and be a leader.
We're gonna whoop your mama's ass! Wow.
The reality is that in real life, gender roles are changing. We don't live in that same small tribe of 200 people anymore. Where once men were only required to be stoic soldiers and solo providers, now they're also expected to be involved fathers and supportive partners. And this is on top of the amazing strides that women have made in the home and in the workplace over the last half century. This is all wonderful progress, and games should reflect that broader shift. And there are, of course, signs of hope. Unlike his strong, fearless brother, Luigi successfully trembles his way through Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. And in Heavy Rain, architect Ethan Mars experiences profound emotional conflict about the violent things he has to do to save his son. Video games are a way to explore other identities in a fun, safe way. Shouldn't games point to the way things should be, rather than just the ways they've always been? So what do you think? Are video games encouraging male stereotypes? Hash it out in the comments. And if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about Anita Sarkeesian, feminism, and games. Let's see what you had to say. Apparently, it was a lot. CD Josh Production says that he loved a performance of female Shepard in Mass Effect more than the male one. There's a great article about it in The New Yorker. There's a link in the description. Jody Schaefer jokes that nothing demonstrates the need for feminism more than any internet thread about it. Rooster Cogburn PhD says that we don't really pay attention to gender, that Mario is just a construct. Really? Because when I look at Mario, I see a guy. Mustache, a name. I don't know, maybe you see something different. So a lot of you argued about whether or not Anita was a gamer. And I guess the question for you, what constitutes a gamer? How many games do you need to play to be a gamer? 1 game? 3 games? All of the games? So does it matter that Anita's a gamer? Or do you think her points are strong enough to be considered on their own? Do you have to be a cinephile to make good arguments about what movies are like? Probably not. Shout out to Katie Baker. It was comments like these that inspired us to make this episode. Seriously, I hope you enjoyed it.